I never thought silence could be so loud. There I was, standing in the hallway outside the chapel, wrapped in layers of white lace and hope. My heart pounded, but not from nerves, from fear, from something I couldn't name yet. Nathan was late. Then he appeared. But instead of taking my hand, he leaned in close, too close, and whispered words I'll never forget. "I can't go through with this. I don't love you enough to marry you." Just like that, the air disappeared. My chest caved in. Everything, my dress, my bouquet, the whispers behind the doors, all blurred. I didn't say a word. I just turned and walked. Out the side door, down the street, into the night. I don't remember how I got to the train station. I just remember sitting on a bench, makeup running, staring at the floor like it would open up and swallow me whole. I called the only person I could think of. Aunt Mabel. She answered on the second ring. "Lauren?" I could barely speak. "Can I come stay?" A pause. Then, "Come if you need to." That was all. By sunrise, I was dragging my suitcase through the narrow gravel road that led to her gate. The village was quiet, peaceful. Too peaceful for the storm inside me. She opened the door, looked me up and down, and stepped aside without a word. Her face didn't change. No hug, no gasp, just a nod toward the backyard. "You can't stay in here," she said. I blinked. "What?" She pointed to the back of the house. "The bakery's empty. There's a cot in the back room. It's dry. That'll do." I wanted to scream, cry, fall to the ground. But I didn't. I just nodded. The bakery was a ghost of something that once mattered. Dust lay thick on the counters. The air smelled like flour and old wood. There were cobwebs in the corners, and an old display case with cracked glass. I sat on the cot. It creaked under my weight. That's when it all hit me. The wedding, the humiliation, the quiet disappointment on Aunt Mabel's face, the way Nathan didn't even try to explain. I pulled my veil off, tossed it aside, and stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. I was alone. In a place that wasn't mine. Wearing a dress that meant nothing now. And yet, there was something oddly calming about the silence. The bakery didn't care that I'd been left. It didn't judge me. It didn't ask questions. It just was. And maybe, for now, that was enough. The mornings came slowly. At first, I didn't set alarms. There was no reason to. Nothing to wake up for. I lay on the narrow cot in the bakery's back room, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to birds outside the broken window. The sun poured through the glass panes up front, lighting the dust in the air like falling snow. I was still wearing pieces of that day, emotionally, anyway. I kept my wedding dress shoved in my suitcase, crumpled and tangled. I couldn't look at it. Not yet. The bakery felt like a stranger's attic. Cracked tiles, rusty shelves, an old cash register that didn't open. It smelled like old sugar and wet wood. I think it used to be beautiful once. Maybe even loved. But now it just felt tired. Like me. For days, I barely left the cot. Aunt Mabel didn't check in. She didn't bring food, just a thick blanket and an old kettle left on a stool. That was her way. No fuss, no talk. Sometimes I wondered if she blamed me. On the third morning, I got up and opened the front door. It stuck at first, like it hadn't moved in years. When I finally yanked it open, fresh air rushed in. Cool and clean. I leaned against the doorframe and watched the street. Nothing happened. A chicken wandered by, then an old man pulling a cart of oranges. No one looked at me. I was invisible. I liked it that way. Later that afternoon, I found a broom and started sweeping. The floor groaned beneath each step, but the rhythm was calming. Sweep, push, dust cloud, cough, repeat. The more I cleaned, the more I noticed details. A cracked photograph tucked behind a flour tin. Faded labels on glass jars. A rusted bell above the door that still jingled when I touched it. There was something peaceful about the silence here. The kind that didn't ask for anything. that didn't expect me to smile or explain or be strong. That night, as I sat cross-legged near the window, I heard it, the soft clink of metal next door. I peeked through the crack between the boards and saw a man, early 30s maybe, working in the shed beside the bakery. He was sanding a chair leg, focused and quiet. No music, no phone, just him and the wood. When he looked up and noticed me, I panicked and ducked. My heart raced. I don't know why. He didn't smile or wave. He just nodded once, slowly, then went back to work. The next morning, he was there again. Same routine. Quiet. Focused. I watched him sometimes through the slats, like a strange comfort. He didn't try to talk, didn't ask questions. One afternoon, I left the door open while I swept. That's when she came, an older woman with silver hair and a walking cane. She paused at the doorway, squinting through the dust. "This place still standing?" she asked, chuckling. I wiped sweat from my brow. Barely. She stepped inside, tapping her cane as she walked. "I used to buy bread here, years ago. Your aunt's raisin loaf could cure anything." I didn't know what to say. She handed me a thermos. "Soup. You look like you need it." Then she left. I stared at the warm metal in my hand, confused, touched. The next day, she passed by again. This time, she waved. I didn't wave back right away. But later, when the sun dipped and the shadows got long, I smiled at nothing. The bakery was still broken. I was still broken. But the dust was clearing. Bit by bit, I was beginning to breathe again. I should have expected the whispers. In a village this small, even the way you blink could become someone's business. So when a woman in a wedding dress suddenly started sleeping in an old, dusty bakery, the curiosity was louder than the church bells. It started with side glances, then soft murmurs, then voices that didn't even bother to lower themselves. She must have been thrown out. Probably did something shameful in the city. Poor Mabel, always cleaning up someone else's mess. Most of the time, they spoke loud enough for me to hear, especially Clara, Aunt Mabel's neighbor, the one who wore bright lipstick at 8 a.m. and carried gossip like it was her job. She didn't even last a day in that house before Mabel shipped her out, I heard Clara say to someone at the fruit stall. Probably embarrassed the whole family. I never corrected her. What would be the point? Still, it stung. I kept sweeping, cleaning, rearranging things that didn't matter. The more I worked, the less I felt like breaking. Then came the girl. She showed up on a Thursday afternoon, barefoot, wide-eyed, maybe 15 at most. I'd just stepped outside with a bucket of water when I saw her peeking through the side window. "Do you want something?" I asked, not unkindly. She jumped and backed away. Sorry. I studied her, hair in braids, a bit of flour on her elbow, curious eyes that darted everywhere except at me. "You're Kemi, right?" I'd heard Clara yell her name across the fence once. She nodded. "My mom used to work here, said it used to smell like cake." I looked back inside the bakery. It smelled more like mildew and old stories now. She hesitated, then blurted, "Can I help?" I blinked. "With what?" "Cleaning, carrying stuff, anything." "Why?" She shrugged. "I just want to." Something about the way she said it made me nod. She came the next day with a rag and more energy than I'd had in weeks. She asked questions nonstop. About the shelves, the mixers, why I looked sad when no one was talking. Eventually, while cleaning out the bottom cabinet, she found a heavy old binder. "What's this?" she asked, wiping the cover. I took it from her, brushing off the dust. It was thick, leather-bound, handwritten pages inside, yellowed with age. Labeled in Aunt Mabel's sharp handwriting. Mabel's Original Recipes, 1992-1999. My fingers trembled as I flipped through it. Raisin cinnamon rolls, sweet bread twists, caramel loaf, notes scribbled in the margins like conversations with herself. "This looks like magic," Kemi whispered beside me. It kind of is, I said. For a long time, I just sat there with the book open on my lap, breathing in the faint smell of vanilla still clinging to the pages. Later that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling again. But this time, I wasn't thinking about the wedding, or Nathan, or Clara's sharp tongue. I was thinking about that old binder, and how, for the first time in weeks, something inside me didn't feel so empty. I hadn't touched flour in years, not since culinary school, not since before life became about weddings and seating charts and dress fittings. But that morning, something pulled me to the kitchen counter. Maybe it was the soft morning light through the bakery window. Maybe it was the binder of Aunt Mabel's recipes lying open like an old friend. Or maybe it was just time. Kemi bounced in right after sunrise, eyes wide and alert like she'd been up for hours. "Are we doing it today?" she asked, breathless. I nodded. One recipe, just one. We chose something simple, Aunt Mabel's honey oat bread. The notes in the margin said, "Customers love this warm with butter, especially on rainy days." It wasn't raining, but it felt like the right place to start. We worked in silence at first, measuring, mixing. Kemi's fingers dusted with flour, her cheeks smudged like she wore it proudly. She handled the kneading like she was squeezing life back into the dough. I tried not to overthink every step. The old oven, after some nudging from the carpenter next door, roared back to life. The heat wrapped around the room, chasing off the morning chill. Then came the smell, warm, sweet, earthy, like comfort in the air. Kemi closed her eyes and said, "It smells like something I used to dream about." I said nothing. My throat was too tight. We pulled the bread out and let it rest on the counter. The crust was uneven, a little pale. I winced. Not great. Kemi grinned. Still beautiful. That's when the knock came. I hesitated before opening the door. It was Mrs. Ruth, the silver-haired woman who had brought me soup a few weeks ago. She leaned on her cane, peering past me into the bakery. "I smelled something," she said, smiling faintly. "And I had a feeling—" I stepped aside, unsure. "We just tried one of the old recipes. It's not—" She raised a hand. "Let me taste it." I sliced a piece and handed it to her on a napkin. She held it like it was made of gold, then took a slow bite. Chewed. Swallowed. Her eyes filled with tears. I panicked. "Is it that bad?" She shook her head. "It tastes like 20 years ago." She turned to leave, but before she did, she pressed something into my palm. A folded note. I opened it after she left. It read, "Don't stop." I stared at it until the words blurred. Later that day, 2 kids knocked on the door, asking if we had more bread. Kemi looked at me with a spark in her eyes. I gave them what we had left. The next morning, we tried a new recipe, something called buttercloud buns. Then a loaf with crushed walnuts. The counters got messy. Our hands stayed sticky. But we kept going. Noah, the carpenter, came by on the 3rd day with a toolkit and a quiet offer. "Mind if I fix that oven door? It's hanging crooked." I nodded. He didn't say much else, but he tightened the hinges, straightened the shelves, and even replaced a broken drawer without asking. Then he left, just as quietly. That night, Kemi and I sat on the bakery floor eating crust ends and giggling about nothing. For the first time in forever, I laughed without guilt. I wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. But I was creating something again, with my hands, with my heart, and people, they were starting to notice. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the only sounds were the hum of the oven and Kemi humming to herself as she folded napkins into triangles. The bakery had taken on a strange sort of rhythm, a heartbeat, not loud, just steady. I was kneading dough when the bell above the front door jingled. I didn't look up right away. We'd had a few new faces lately, People stopping by after hearing about the girl baking out of Mabel's old shop. I figured it was someone curious, maybe someone hungry, but then I heard the voice. Lauren. I froze. The air went still. My hands were buried in dough, but my body went cold. Slowly, I looked up. Nathan stood there, soaked from the rain, water dripping off his collar. His eyes were tired. Older. Or maybe I'd just stopped seeing them the way I used to. "Can we talk?" he asked softly. Kemi looked between us, confused, until I nodded toward the back room. "Could you give us a moment?" She grabbed her bag without a word and slipped out the back door. Now it was just us. I didn't offer him a seat. He looked around the bakery like it was a museum. "You've been busy." I didn't respond. "I found out where you were through your aunt. She didn't tell me much." "Good," I said. He swallowed hard. I didn't know how to say it then. I panicked. Everything was moving too fast. My parents were pressuring me. "Don't," I said, holding up my hand. "Don't try to explain it like it was a moment of confusion. You left me in a wedding dress, in front of my family, my friends. You whispered it like it was a secret to keep me from making a scene." He looked down at the floor. "I didn't come here to hurt you again," he said. I wanted you to know I regret it." Regret. That word used to mean something to me. But now, standing behind the counter of a warm little bakery with dough on my hands and cinnamon in the air, it sounded small. "You should go," I said, my voice even. He looked like he wanted to say more. But he didn't. The door closed behind him with a soft thud. I didn't cry. Not then. Later that night, after Kimmy had gone home and the bakery was dark, I sat by the window with a blanket and let the silence in. It wasn't the silence of heartbreak anymore. It was quieter, sadder, wiser. I let myself cry for 10 minutes. That was all. Then I got up. I pulled out the recipe binder, flipped through the pages, and landed on something called cinnamon firebread. The note in the margin said, "Sweet, but don't underestimate the kick." It felt right. The next morning, I baked it. The scent filled the bakery with warmth and something else, boldness. Customers loved it. One woman said, "It's like getting a hug and a slap at the same time." I smiled and nodded. That was exactly the point. I didn't tell Kemi what had happened. She didn't ask, but she watched me closely that day, like she knew something had shifted. Nathan didn't come back, and honestly, that was fine with me. I hadn't heard from Aunt Mabel in weeks. She'd always been a woman of few words and even fewer explanations. When she left the village for a long-needed break, she didn't say where she was going or when she'd be back. She just handed me the spare key to the bakery and said, "Don't burn the place down." I thought she meant it as a joke. Maybe she hadn't. The bakery had grown into something real since she left. Every morning now, we had a line before sunrise. A chalkboard stood outside with Kemi's neat handwriting listing the daily specials. Noah had built us new benches. Kids sat on them with sticky fingers and crumb-covered cheeks. People smiled when they walked past. Some even called me Mabel's niece, with pride in their voices. I didn't know what I expected the day she returned, but I definitely didn't expect her to walk straight through the front door, suitcase in hand, eyes scanning the room like she had just stepped into someone else's dream. It was early afternoon. We had just sold the last of the cinnamon firebread, and Kemi was sweeping near the oven when the bell above the door jingled. I turned and froze. She stood there in the doorway, hair pulled back tight, sunglasses perched on her head. The same Mabel I remembered. Only this time, her expression wasn't unreadable. It was stunned. She took a step forward, slow, eyes flicking over every detail. The chalkboard menu, the wooden shelves lined with loaves, the tiny vase of sunflowers on the counter. Her gaze landed on me, flour on my apron, a smudge on my cheek. You, she began, but the words trailed off. Hi, Aunt Mabel, I said, unsure. She blinked, then looked around again. What is all this? It's the bakery, I said softly. I just cleaned it up a bit. Kemi stepped out from the back with a tray of freshly baked buns and stopped short when she saw Mabel. Oh, hi. You must be Lauren's aunt. Mabel nodded slowly, but said nothing. I moved around the counter, wiping my hands. We started baking a few things, some of your old recipes. People started coming by, then they kept coming, so we kept going. She walked slowly toward the counter, running her hand over the surface. You painted this, she said. And the floors? We had to scrub them 3 times, Kemi offered cheerfully. Mabel let out a small laugh, though it sounded more like surprise than humor. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, papers inside. Legal ones. She held it in her hand, looked down at them, then back at the bakery. I came to sell the place, she said. That was the plan. The words hung in the air like flour dust. Oh, I said. But she didn't move. She looked around again, this time slower. At the woman near the door cradling a warm loaf in her arms, at the kid licking icing off a bun, at the old man sipping tea in the corner, at Noah outside adjusting the umbrella on the bench, and finally, back at me. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. But her eyes softened in a way I hadn't seen before. She tucked the folder back into her bag without a word and sat down at the nearest table. I'll take one of those, she said, nodding toward the cinnamon buns. Kemi lit up and hurried over. I stood behind the counter unsure what just happened, but I knew this much. She wasn't selling the bakery. Not today. The bakery was quiet that evening. The last customer had left and Kemi had gone home after sweeping the front porch twice, like she always did when she was nervous. Aunt Mabel hadn't said much since she sat down hours earlier. She ate her cinnamon buns slowly, watched the world through the window, and sipped tea like she was trying to figure out what exactly she'd come home to. Now, it was just the 2 of us. I was wiping down the counters when I saw her walk toward the back. She moved slowly, her hand brushing the doorframe as she stepped into the storage room, the same room where I'd cried myself to sleep on a flour sack the first night I arrived. I followed her. The room looked different now. The cobwebs were gone. The floor was clean. Neatly stacked bags of flour lined one wall. Extra pans hung from hooks, and taped to the freezer door was something small and weathered, a photo. She reached up and took it in her hand. It was a picture I'd found while cleaning weeks ago. Mabel in her 20s standing in front of the bakery covered in flour, laughing with a rolling pin in one hand and a loaf in the other. There was a wild joy in her face, untamed, alive. I'd pinned it there without thinking, just something to remind me that this place once held laughter. She stared at it for a long time. Her shoulders were still, but I could see her fingers trembling slightly. I forgot about this day, she said almost to herself. It was the first time I sold out before noon. My hands were shaking. I couldn't believe people came back. I said nothing, just stood behind her and listened. She let out a slow breath and turned to face me. Her eyes were wet. You didn't just clean this place, she said. You brought it back. I swallowed hard. I didn't know what else to do after everything. I just needed something to hold on to. She looked around the room again. I walked away from this place when it stopped feeling like mine. When the bills piled up and the joy dried up, I thought maybe the best thing to do was let it go. I didn't know what to say. I still felt like a guest in her space, even after all this time. She took a step forward and put her hand gently on my shoulder. But you didn't let it go, she said quietly. You listened to it. You stayed. Even when it hurt. I blinked fast, trying not to let the tears come, but they did anyway. I didn't think I could anymore, I whispered. Not after he left me. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Then maybe we both needed this place. There was a long pause, not awkward, just full. She pulled me into a hug, the kind that wasn't rushed, the kind that filled all the space that had been empty between us. And then softly, she said, "You're stronger than I ever was." The words hit me deeper than I expected, maybe because they came from her, maybe because I had never seen her cry. But in that moment, I believed her. We stood there for a while, surrounded by flour and old memories, and something new that neither of us could quite name. Later, she sat at the front counter again while I locked the doors. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe we'd bake the raisin loaf again. Maybe we'd run out of cinnamon. Maybe no one would show up. But the soul of the bakery was back. And this time, we were holding on to it. Together.